You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into Mizzou That's Who, your podcast for Missouri athletics here on Kansas City Sports Network. As always, I'm joined by Gabe DeArmond and Maggie Johnson, but we have a very special guest today. You might know him if you listen to the audio channels on the Mizzou Network already, or if you are tuned into the KCSNU YouTube channel. You know Jarrett Sutton. You also probably know him as a former Missouri guard on this 2012 Big 12 championship team that on the t-shirt that I am wearing had to represent. Jarrett, how are you doing today?
I'm great after seeing that tee. That got me even more energized for this upcoming game. But it's good to be on the pod here. I've enjoyed listening to you guys, and hopefully we can talk about some little better storylines this year for this Mizzou Kansas matchup than what we were talking about last year.
Yeah,
rough. But it's all it's a new day. It's a new year, new coach. Let's go.
Yeah, it's and hey, this one's at home. We know home court advantage tends to be a thing in this rivalry. So look, like, we don't want to take up your whole day, so I'm just gonna get right to the important thing. You've told me this story before. Other guys on this team have told me this story before. But 10 years ago, the last time Kansas was in this building, just tell the Marcus Denman story, go into the huddle and telling Frank Haith, like, quit screwing around, let me win the game.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even so much like, as you guys know, and Gabe been just covering Marcus, like, man, a few words, as tough as nails. That look in his eye was real when he really didn't have to say anything. It was just sort of how he carried himself. And I know Phil and Lawrence on Mizzou Hoops Instagram account, they had that video of them breaking down really that game and that final stretch. And Phil said it best. Like, Marcus got going before he hit those shots that propelled us to the win. He was getting into his rhythm before that, and obviously had the mismatch that we wanted, which I thought Kansas would adjust to. But Marcus, he smelled blood in the water, to quote Frank Clark, right? I mean, it was his time to shine. And there's a picture that got sent to me this week when the game's tied. I think there's like 50 seconds left. And in the huddle, I mean, you can tell we're all locked in. There's not nerves, but the fact that we're in that moment, what are we going to draw for Marcus? Like, we have to get Marcus the ball. Kansas knew it. I mean, everybody, I think, in the arena knew Marcus was getting the ball. And the way that the plays kind of operated there late in the game, I mean, there was a lot of miscommunication. It was sort of a chopped up play where we didn't run a play that we really wanted to run. And then Marcus just makes a massive shot, which is just par for the course in this rivalry, right? I mean, the same thing happened with Zaire Taylor in 2009, where we had a busted play and Zaire just goes and makes a big shot. I mean, you got to have guys in late in games that want the ball and want that moment. Some guys don't want that moment. It's especially in the rivalry, right? But a Kansas City kid that goes to Mizzou, that's overlooked in the recruitment process, senior year, All-American. I mean, the script writes itself for the legacy Marcus Denman left at Mizzou.
Was there ever a point in that game you guys thought that you might not win, or were you always locked in that you were going to win that game?
Well, we'd found ways to win many of those games that year, not just the Kansas game. I think to, Gabe's question too about just like home court advantage, it's wild to think of the wins that we had at Mizzou Arena against Kansas kind of felt very similar, where we didn't really play all that well. And we're very frustrated with that, with us not playing well in terms of making shots, missing free throws, turning the ball over. There were things of both games that we really struggled with. But I think what is consistent with both wins in 2009 and in 2012 was just in the final 4-minute period, we had to get stops. Some things had to go our way. And we knew if we could really execute, we'd have a chance. And we clawed back in both games that we won at home. And I think in 2012, so much is made of Marcus, making plays, but you got to go to the defensive side of the ball too. And just stops. We got charges that were controversial, but we got stops. And, Kansas was a very good team. I mean, that matchup in 2012 so different than 09 because with what was at stake, right? With just us leaving the Big 12 and the fact that we smelled a Big 12 championship and we knew we were that good. And we were small ball type of team. And I know Coach Self has said this, but we kind of were the first team that really took small ball to a new level in terms of being just an incredible passing team. And I'm really, kind of amazed that Phil admitted it on the in Mizzou Hoops channel, where he didn't actually play a great game that you're used to seeing Phil play. And I think he was really frustrated with how he played because they took him out of the game, really, in terms of him being able to do what he did all year. And that's just carve up defenses. And I think Kansas, give them credit, they had a great game plan against us of just trying to take Phil out of the game. But Marcus was an All-American, and Marcus lived for those moments and carried us over the line. And that's what leaders do. That's what seniors do. And that's what All-Americans do.
Yeah, phenomenal games. Both games. Obviously, the one in Lawrence didn't end up like we wanted to, but both phenomenal basketball.
But can we admit though that Marcus at Lawrence, in Lawrence, he hits a game winner. It's just after the overtime. That's what is so crazy. And as locked in as Marcus was at home, he might have been more locked in on the road in Lawrence in that overtime period. I mean, again, the dude had a different level that he got to in those games. I think that's what I always think about at the loss in Lawrence is, we gave that game away, and there's a lot of things that I think about all the time. But Marcus in that overtime period, I mean, he hits a three from deep in overtime that I thought he was out of bounds from where I was sitting on the bench. So, I mean, he almost carried us again over the line at their place as well.
Jarrett, be honest, man. It's been 10 years. That is not what you think about when you think about that game, because that is not what anybody thinks about when they think about that game. I talked to Tyshawn Taylor this week, and even he admitted it was a questionable call. He won't tell me it was the wrong call, but he did admit it was questionable.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk to Travis Relaford. I think if you get Connor Tehan in a room, I think a lot of those guys thought, man, we might have got a home court call there. You said it, Gabe. I mean, again, I'm just looking at it from my angle too. Very, very surprised, I would say, that Phil didn't get a call there, and that controversial.
And if we want to be honest, maybe Steve Moore could have been called for a block. Maybe Mike Dixon could have been called for sliding under. That's why home court matters. I mean, it's why when you go to Lawrence, Kansas, you better have a 9-point lead with a minute left, because otherwise you're probably not going to win the game.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest point for me is, like, I don't talk about the Phil call all that much because there's possessions prior to that moment even happening where we let down. I mean, we had, and look, Kansas went on a run. We knew they were going to go on a run, but we didn't do some things where we took a couple of ill-advised shots, some things that I still scratch my head over of what we were doing in that final 4 minutes. We didn't close, period, and we shouldn't have put the game in the officials' hands. But hey, that game was in Lawrence, right? We're talking about the win on Norm Stewart Court. That was the greatest moment, really, of really submitting our legacy as seniors and just what we did all 4 years. But everybody knew we had to win that game. I mean, everybody knew we had to take care of that for the rivalry, for the last game in Mizzou Arena for Mizzou, Kansas. The feelings going into that game with game day and the night before with Antlers and the Zoo crew and St. Louis and Kansas City folks driving in and just hanging out at the arena on Friday, leaving practice, and you're like, we don't even have a game. It feels like we have a game, but the game's tomorrow. I mean, that was such a wild experience to go through that year.
I think that's one of the cool things about MUKU is that no matter how much time kind of goes by, it's like when that game is on the calendar and you see it, like nothing else matters. No, I mean, you obviously want to win games throughout the season, but if you win that game, it kind of, it matters more. Would you say, like, when you think back on that 2012 season and how great you guys were, that those games just matter a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, especially just the difference of any Mizzou Kansas game in terms of, you're circling, you're going to face them twice at your place and at their place. But in 2012, it was so different, right? Because there was that added pressure that we're leaving the league. And I've said this before, the hostility of the rivalry in 2012 was as strong as it's ever been, I think. I went to high school with a lot of people that went to KU. We didn't talk that entire year. It was just, it's hard to describe. Like, I think now it's still a rivalry, and we know that it's Mizzou, Kansas. I mean, everything that's gone on with the bowl stuff, clearly there's just always something that Mizzou and Kansas fans can, sink their teeth in. But in 2012, it was just, especially being from Kansas City, it just felt so different. I mean, it really did. It just felt like everything was on the line. We were a great team. Like, we were playing for NCAA tournament seeding, and we were playing obviously for a Big 12 championship. It was almost like all the wins we had, like we had a big win at Baylor. That was a huge, massive win. There's such a great memory. There were so many great wins of that year. It almost felt like, well, yeah, those are great wins, but it doesn't, take into consideration that Mizzou and Kansas are the biggest games on our schedule. And it was different. But like similar to any Mizzou-Kansas rivalry, I think when you're a player, the games leading up to Kansas, you want to try to win those games because you want your fans to have that momentum too of, all right, we're playing really well. Like, I think that's really important. Like Mizzou this year winning at Wichita State, that's a good win because you want your fans to still kind of be intertwined of this team's building and building and building up to Kansas. That's kind of what it always feels like too. It's not just the game, it's the games leading up to it where you really want to be playing well so you can really feel confident going into that Kansas matchup, knowing that you got a good chance and you're playing good ball.
Well, that's something that, I went on a Kansas podcast yesterday. They're talking like it doesn't feel like it has the same juice from the Kansas side as at least that they were saying, because, they came in and they beat this Mizzou team by 40 last year. So they're thinking that they can kind of do the same thing again. This is a completely different Missouri basketball team. Jarrett, you dive into that a lot on the Border War podcast. Very great X's and O's podcast. If you haven't listened to it already on this same audio channel, same YouTube channel that you're watching this video on, go check that out. But I'm curious to your feelings about kind of the revitalization of the rivalry. I don't think it ever should have went away, but do you think we'll get back to that 2012 type level with not being in the same conference and not playing twice a year again?
I don't know. I mean, that's tough to live up to. The fact we were in the league and we were competing for a Big 12 title, and at that point, Kansas is on that consecutive streak, and we had won 2 Big 12 tournament championships, and we were, a force to be reckoned with in the Big 12 my 4 years at Mizzou from 08 to 12. But, to think back at the 09 games, the 09 game at Mizzou Arena with the court storm, that was my first taste of being in an actual Mizzou Kansas game and running out on the floor where there was so much media where we couldn't actually get to the floor from the tunnel. Because that was the biggest moment for us as freshmen. We played in the Illinois game. That was like my first taste of, wow, like these are college basketball atmospheres. Then the Mizzou Arena to have that type of environment in 09 was really just an incredible moment. To see where the program has been at since we left, and I've said this before, like when we left, our class felt like the program was in great shape. The class or the team after us, I think, was way more talented than we were, with, Keon Bell and Ernest Ross and Alex Oriaki. Phil was back. Lawrence was coming back from injury. You just felt like the program was in really good hands. And that, moving to the SEC, we were going to be really competitive in the SEC, and we were going away from rivalries, but the basketball program was in good shape. And it's really been a struggle over the last 10 years. There's been some good moments. There's been a lot of disappointments. And the goal is to get the program back to, the respect that I wanted to be at from a former player standpoint. I do believe we should be competitive. I do believe we should be, competing in the SEC. It's a tough league. It's the SEC is such a different league than what the SEC was when we were at Mizzou in 08 to 12. I mean, the SEC was Kentucky, Florida, and that was it. And now you got Arkansas in the mix. You got Auburn. You got Tennessee. You got great coaches in the league. Mizzou should be in this conversation. So I'm more concerned about that. In terms of the Mizzou-Kansas rivalry, we'll make it a rivalry when obviously we're undefeated right now. So much is made of the schedule and who we've played. But they're winning games and they're fun brand of basketball to watch. They can score. And this is the first year for Dennis Gates. So there's positives, but it's just the start. I mean, this is a process. I hate to use the word patient because it is tough when you want your team to get back to, where the team was in 2012. I want that just as much as anybody else. But I also know that it takes time. Mike Anderson's talked about this all the time, and I've talked to him privately about this. When, the year that we went to the Elite Eight, the year we beat Kansas in 2009, there was no expectation on that team going into that year in 2008, 2009. Nothing. I mean, there was no talk from students, no talk from fans. We really had to earn that because the year prior, there was so much turmoil. And you turn the program around by recruiting classes, you turn programs around with leadership and older players, which they have on this roster. So Coach Gates is trying to rebuild it, and it's going to take time, and it's going to be a process to go through that.
Jarrett, last thing for me, because again, we don't want to keep you all day, but I take out, like, okay, you had a better seat, a closer view of 4 of these games than anybody that's talking here are going to listen. But take those out of the picture. And like you said, you grew up in KC. I mean, a lot of people might not know. Like, I went to high school with Jarrett's older brother, and we grew up probably 10 minutes away from each other, although he was a little later than I was. So we've got kind of similar roots in this thing. I mean, I'm the old guy here. Like, I remember Lee Coward and Doug Smith and AP and all that in this rivalry. Before you got there, like, what was MUK? Is there a game that you remember, or because you know the history of this thing, or something that you remember watching?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, me and Gabe, true Northlanders, but both my brothers went to Mizzou, and it was actually my middle brother that was at Mizzou when I was in 7th grade. And I mean, I was a college basketball fan as a kid. Like in elementary school, I loved college basketball, Big 12 tournament at Kemper Arena. I'd go to all those games, and I loved college basketball. And then I started watching this guy, Kareem Rush, at Pembroke Hill. And that really took my Mizzou basketball fandom to kind of the next level because I knew he was going to Mizzou. And I remember Jerron, and, if you're from Kansas City, you know the Rush brothers and their impact on Kansas City hoops. But Kareem, it was like a man amongst children. I mean, it was unbelievable to watch him at Pembroke Hill. And it was like, oh, boy, this guy is an NBA player. He's from Kansas City, and you immediately were drawn to him. And then he goes to Mizzou. And those teams he was on, you fell in love with Ricky Paulding, Trayvon Bryant, AJ. And my first game was Hearn Center. It was Mizzou, Kansas. It was Kirk Heinrich, Nick Collison, and those teams. And I remember my first feeling of like, wow, this is Mizzou, Kansas. Like, this is so different, was being outside of Hearn Center. I'm in the student section, getting ready to get into Hearn Center. And Kirk Heinrich's family is walking past on like that walkway that I didn't even know what it was, but they were walking the families of the Kansas players away from the Mizzou fans. And the next thing I know, I look around and I'm kind of deer in the headlights, right? I'm in 7th grade. I'm like, what is going on here? And I see some eggs being thrown from some students. And I couldn't make it out of like what it was. And then it was like, oh wow, they're throwing eggs right now at Kirk Heinrich's family. This is different. And those I remember, and Gabe, you'll test, like Hearn Center was so unbelievably loud. Like I had been to Chiefs games at Arrowhead as a kid, but to go into Hearns, it was a totally different. Like it was wild. I mean, those games were so great, and Kansas won that game on a Aaron Miles just ridiculous shot. But it was an incredible game, and Mizzou was so good, and AJ at that time was so dominant, and those teams had great success as well. But you just think about those games at Hearns. That's what my first memories were, and just the rivalry was so real at that time, and Mizzou was humming right there with Quinn Snyder. I was going to Quinn Snyder basketball camps as a kid, so that was really my first taste of Mizzou and Kansas.
I was number 21 in middle school because of Kareem Rush, so I can also sympathize with the love for Kareem Rush. Yeah, it was common. So I know you said you don't talk about it. This is gonna be my last question for you. You don't talk about it. You don't like to think about it really. But would you have called the foul on
Absolutely.
Thomas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a foul. It was a foul. Everybody knows it was a foul. Everybody that understands basketball knows it was a foul. And they got a home court call. We know all about it. It is what it is. So I don't think Kansas would have put it as their intro for like this week. I don't know if you guys saw that. If they didn't know that it was a foul, that wasn't called.
Right. Well done. The other option for the video they were going to use was Bill with the diamond dollar necklace and Snoop on the stripper pole in Allen Fieldhouse. But
that's frowned upon. They don't want to go there. They don't want to go there.
Well, Jarrett, we really appreciate your time today. You will have a podcast coming out on Friday with Jeff Hawkins, a guy who played at Kansas, former Kansas guard, I believe 01 to 05, I believe is the years that he was at Kansas. So you guys have a great perspective on the game. You guys know these programs well. You guys know the X's and O's. Listen, Unbiased, it's one of my favorite basketball podcasts out there. Just with the
Unbiased.
basketball knowledge, unbiased opinion.
Unbiased. I love it.
You know me, I'm unbiased. I think what you guys are doing are awesome, especially with the perspective from both sides. It's going to be one of those podcasts that you're going to want to listen to on your way to Columbia, whether you're coming from St. Louis, Kansas City, anywhere in the state, or if you're in Columbia already listening and getting ready for the game, you're going to want to listen to your guys' conversation. So, Jarrett, looking forward to that. Thank you so much for your time today, man.
Guys, love the pod. Thanks for having me. And to all Mizzou fans, I hope you get down to Columbia and enjoy Mizzou Arena being what it once was in 2012. I'm excited for Coach Gates and these players to really feel that. It's going to be totally different than anything they've experienced. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, that was Jarrett Sutton. Appreciate his time as always. Phenomenal conversation. Love that guy. Great dude, and has some great perspective on the teams of the past and also, the teams of this year. He was welcomed with open arms with Dennis Gates. That's kind of the big thing that he really loves the direction that this program's going. It's encouraging to, hear that from a guy who's been in the program. Dennis really wants to reach out to the alumni. We had CY on, and he said CY even said that was a big thing that they wanted to do is get the alumni connected into the program. So really encouraged to see how that's going and great to get Jarrett's perspective on that.
Yeah, agree. I have nothing to add.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. We, as soon as Jarrett got off, I even told Gabe and Tucker, I was like, that was so cool. Just to hear somebody that was like there in the moment. Like I was in the gym in 2009. So like I felt it, but I don't think you really you feel it, but it's different when you're down there. I am 1,000,000% sure. So
it's fun to talk to guys like that after it's been long enough that they can just tell the stories and be honest about things, right? Because look, like you go in the locker room and interview those guys after that game. I mean, they're saying all the right things and all that, even while they're still college players. I talked to Mike Dixon for the story. I wrote about this, and Dixon said, I think Kansas lost to Baylor in the Big 12 tournament on purpose because they didn't want any part of us in Kansas City. I mean, first of all, obviously not, but great quote, I thought it was funny. I mean, I talked to Tyshawn Taylor, and he said, look, we had the better team in 2012. I know we did. They know we did. And Mike Dixon said, we had the better team in 2012. I know we did, and they know we did, I mean, so it's still it's been 10 years, but it's still a thing, this is, and that's why this is fun. You're Jarrett was talking about Kentucky coming to Mizzou Arena, and that's fine. And I don't know, I might get some blowback on this. Maggie, you're from St. Louis, so maybe in St. Louis it's viewed differently. Illinois, to me, it's an awesome game. For one night, it's maybe my favorite sporting event of the year because it's 50-50, and you don't get that in MUKU because it's always on campus, right? So for one night, that is an unbelievable thing. But it's just not this, man. No other game on the schedule is this, even though they haven't played it for 10 years. And look, it's not going to be the same as it was when they were playing for the conference lead and all that. And these guys would play 7-8 times in their college careers. There's not a player on the court who really understands what this is about. And let's be honest, there's probably only one coach on either bench. Bill Self gets this.
Yeah.
But do Missouri's, I'm not sure Missouri's coaches even know what they're walking into on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree about the bragging rights. Well, I'm actually from closer to Kansas City. So I kind of, it was more about Kansas. My dad always joked, whenever he tells people, he's like, yeah, my daughter loves Mizzou, is a huge Mizzou fan. He's always the second she stepped on campus as a freshman at Mizzou, she hated all things Kansas. And we always joked about that because it was growing up, I don't think it was a huge hatred on my end, but once I was at Mizzou, I hate those guys. I mean, it changes.
That's funny because I literally grew up that there was a poster at my dad's office that said, why do trees in Missouri lean to the west? Because Kansas sucks.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's like,
So,
you knew it. You knew it was going on. Like you know about, we just said his name on the thing. The guys playing before, like I watched Arthur Johnson play. I watched Kareem Rush play. Like I watched those guys and, I remember those rivalries, but it didn't become, I feel like, pure hatred until I stepped on campus. And then it was, there's no going back. But I agree, being over here in St. Louis, you see Illinois people and, we'll give each other dirty looks sometimes, but it's different. It's not even close to the same.
Yeah. Last thing I got on kind of the history of the rivalry, or just not necessarily history, but just like the old rivalry, I guess is what you could call it. And then now we have the new rivalry, right? The old rivalry, I can remember growing up and being so scared of these games. Not necessarily that I was scared of Kansas, but I was scared to lose because I didn't want to deal with the shit talking for the whole year from Kansas fans. And I remember going into the Arrowhead games when they would play for football, the basketball games. Like, I grew up in North Central Missouri, so you get all kinds. You get Nebraska fans up there, you get Kansas fans up there, Iowa. So there's all kinds of different fans, and it doesn't matter if they're a Kansas fan or not. If Missouri loses to Kansas, they're going to give it to you. So I just would go into those games as a kid, just being so scared that I was going to have to deal with all of this for a year. And that pertains mostly to football, because I can remember a lot of those big matchups in football. But Jarrett hit on it too. The bowl thing is going to be another hinge point in this rivalry, just another chapter in the story maybe. But no, it's exciting. This Mizzou basketball team's playing really well right now, which is huge.
Yeah, but I still don't really know what I know about them.
That's fair.
We're going to find out more on Saturday than we found out about this team all year, because the worst case scenario for Missouri coming into this game was probably 7-2. Like, you lose at Wichita State and then you just maybe no-show one other night, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the worst they could possibly be, was 7-2. Now 9-0 is obviously, but they have done what they needed to do. They've done what you thought they probably would do. But this is, like, I don't think this is an elite Kansas team, maybe at some of the levels of some of the ones Bill and even going back to Roy have had there. Right. So, like me and Maggie were talking before you got on here, I think the line for this is going to be like KU by like 3.5 points or something like that. Like, I've talked to some people that follow KU that think Missouri maybe wins this game. And that's not going to shock me, but just it's unlike, not just because of the atmosphere and the rivalry, but just the level of competition is something we have not seen this team face yet.
Right.
I also don't think it helps. Didn't Grady Dick is from Kansas, right? Like,
I think that's right.
Yeah. I think they posted some photos. He's like young and Kansas stuff. He's one of those players, like he's lived for this moment. He's lived for this Missouri-Kansas rivalry. Well, we give up a lot of points. So.
Well, and I think DeJuan Harris probably gets this. Mm-hmm. Isaiah Mosley probably gets this. I mean, look, we'll be honest. We don't know if Isaiah's going to play. I mean, it's been a little bit of a yo-yo, right? So who knows? But he probably understands this. But I'm not like. The difference now is I don't think probably they hate KU the way, like Maggie was talking about hating KU, the way Jarrett and those guys, like, sure, they respected the players on the Kansas team, but they knew what that meant to fans. And look, I understand that the students are going to be charged up. The fans in that are to hate Kansas. I think you've got to be like, not quite my age, but at least Maggie's age, right? Like,
I heard you do that interview and you said 35, and I was like, that's probably about right.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably about 35 is because you grew up in this, right? I mean, you watch these games. You remember Lee Coward beating them. You remember Anthony Peeler going off for 43 in Lawrence, but still not winning. You remember David Padgett shutting down Hearns with just this ridiculous shot, you know. You remember Melvin Booker going in and winning in 94. So I do think to have a full appreciation of what this is, like, You can't be 18 and have that. You were 7 years old the last time they were here. That doesn't really mean to you what it might mean if you are 35, 45, 55 years old.
I agree. I was 14 in 2012. So, like even me, you can take my Missouri fan card away if you want me to. The hate was obviously there when I was in those very early impressionable years, but they haven't played for 10 years. And that
Right.
doesn't, that it's hard to sustain that hatred for a team that you haven't played in 10 years. And that's been trying to get that back, really getting that back too, because, you know, the bowl stuff, and then you got the basketball team chirping. Losing in Allen Fieldhouse by 40 was a really quick way to get to, man, I do hate these guys. I remember how much I hate these guys. But no, getting back there is I think going to be a goal. You have to think that they're going to renew their contract after it gets done. I mean, we talked about it on the last show, but
I think it'll just be too good for everybody involved not to go, well, yeah, we have to do this, right? I mean,
right,
I don't know if you guys went to the hurricane relief thing they did in Sprint Center, which was 17. I mean, it was a practice game that didn't even matter. And I think everybody walked out of there going, what the hell are we doing not playing this game?
Right.
You know?
Did Michael Porter play in that game?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
He
went seriously like 7 for 20 something. Like he shot the ball so many times, and Jeremiah Tillman had like 39 fouls in that game because they just let guys keep playing, you know.
They're like, we're raising money, it doesn't matter.
Right. Like even to the guys on the court in that game, it wasn't really like they knew, like, okay, it's an exhibition, but like it would be way better if we win this game than if we don't.
So I was looking at the KenPom ratings and just a bunch of different KenPom numbers for this game, and I think it's really interesting where this Missouri team ranks. They're 49th in KenPom. Their adjusted offense is 12th in the country. Their adjusted tempo is 4th. So they play a really quick brand of basketball. They score the ball really well. Their adjusted efficiency margin is plus 14, which is very good. But when you start to look at some of the other metrics that they have, their adjusted strength of schedule is 361st in the country. I think that's out of 364.
Okay.
I could be wrong. Let me scroll down. Out of 363. So they are 361 out of 363 in strength of schedule. Less than ideal, you could say. And their adjusted defense is 125th out of obviously the same number of schools. So offensively, they can score the basketball. You've been able to see it. Demoy Hodge has been balling, quietly balling, I'll say, just because, you know, football's been going on. Hard to dominate a football SEC football team, but he's been balling. They've got a lot of guys that can score the basketball. It's just what I worry about is the defense, how well they can match up with Kansas and stop them. And again, Gabe, you mentioned it. It's something that I kept going back to when I was on Ain't No Seats yesterday. I just kept saying, man, they haven't really played anybody. They played a Wichita State team, which how good is Wichita State really? Because they lost to Kansas State too. Again, Kansas State came back in that game. I'm not saying Kansas State's world beaters by any means. I'm not saying that they're bad, but I think Kansas State's in a similar position that Missouri's in terms of program wise. They've got a lot of transfers, got a new coach. So that's really interesting just in that whole development. But the Kansas guys that I talked to yesterday weren't very confident in this game just because of how Missouri matches up. And it just could be one of those things where it's a tough matchup for Kansas.
Well, and it's, you know, like, I mean, Kansas has played Duke. They've played Wisconsin. So they've been tested, certainly much more than Missouri has. I think Missouri has to run to win this game. Like, if this game's played in the 60s, I don't think Missouri can win. Because I just haven't seen them do that to anybody. I don't think the defense is good enough maybe to win a 68-65 game. Kansas probably is a little more. Now, the flip side of that is I'm not sure that's what Kansas wants to do. Like, I don't think they necessarily want to. They don't have Greg Ostertag, Cole Aldrich, you know, David McCullough even on this team that like is a typical. I mean, Kobe Brown's probably going to be the biggest dude on the floor most of this game. Yeah. You know, so you would think, hey, maybe that favors Missouri, but, you know, Kansas has it. Like, they've got a lot of skill. Let's be honest. Kansas has more talent than Missouri does. So I think Kansas, I think they want to play similar ways. I think if it does get into a little bit of a slow down, grind it out, play defense game, I trust Kansas to win that type of a game more than I trust Missouri to win that type of a game. I think Missouri's got to get this to like 85 points and go beat them 85-81 and do it with turning the ball over and getting some transition baskets, because I just haven't seen Missouri settle down in a half-court offense and be forced to execute other than about 15 minutes of that Wichita State game, and those were not the good 15 minutes for Missouri.
How much do you think the crowd plays into the game on Saturday? I mean, it's going to be probably the loudest players over at Kansas have heard. I mean, some of them played on a national championship, but I don't think that
that's different.
I mean, because there's a bunch of people that aren't even fans at a national championship game. I mean, this is 15,000 probably around Mizzou fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested. There'll be a few hundred KU fans, right? I don't think it'll be a ton, but this is going to be the first time most of these guys have walked into a place where, like, they're all against you, and so how they handle that will be interesting. Now, look, this is also, like, Dennis Gates made a big deal in the preseason. I want big crowds before the KU game, so that's not the first time our guys experience that. And they've had some good crowds, but this is the first time they're going to experience this, and it always has been. And, I mean, that can go two ways. It can get you charged up, but it can get you too charged up, right? I mean, let's be honest. Kobe Brown has been here for 4 years. He's never played in a building that's going to be like that is tomorrow. A lot of these guys were playing at Cleveland State and Northern Iowa and Milwaukee. They've never played in anything like this. And I think I said it earlier. I'm not sure Dennis Gates knows what he's going to walk into tomorrow when he comes out of that tunnel. I mean, he's never heard an ovation like he's going to hear walking out of that tunnel tomorrow. And, I talked to Frank Haight for the story I wrote this morning, and he said, like, his equipment manager made him watch the Outlaw Josie Wales movie the night before that game. He said, I want you to understand this. And he said, they told me I'd never experienced anything like this. And they were right. Like that 2012 game we were talking about with Jarrett, that was Frank's first experience in this rivalry. And he's like, they're right. I've never experienced anything like that. So you can't really prepare. And even these Mizzou students that are going to be in the crowd, they might think they know, but, like, unless you were in the arena for Zaire Taylor or for that 2012 game or for Christian Moody, you don't know what this is going to be like. And it's a whole different thing than anybody there has ever seen.
Step game.
Also the refs. Also the refs, though. Like,
that's true.
That's why the home court matters in college basketball. Because, look, let's be honest. If that Steve Moore play is in Lawrence, it's a blocking foul. Yep. If that Thomas Robinson, Phil Pressey play is in Columbia, it is a foul on Robinson. Like, it was like CY was talking about when we had him on. He's like, you get these refs doing these, like, 4-step approaches and calling like, the crowd influences them more than it does in any other sport because it's so loud. It's such a confined space. If Missouri gets on a 7-0 run and they get a couple steals and dunks, that place is going to be so loud. Kansas is getting called for a charge on the next possession. Like, it's just how college basketball goes.
Yeah, it is. And before I want to get our predictions, Kansas, I'm looking at their KenPom numbers too, because I was just curious. I've just been looking at Missouri's KenPom numbers. I was like, I should go up in a little ways to look at Kansas. They're 11th in KenPom right now. Number 6 team in the country, 11th in KenPom. Think about that. Their adjusted offense, 22 in the country. Adjusted defense, 15. This will obviously be the toughest defense the Missouri Tigers have faced. That's kind of going to be a big point, I think, is if Kansas can lock down Mizzou. It also seems like Mizzou's faced a lot of teams that hit like 23s, and it's just like one of those things. And Kansas doesn't hit threes at that high.
But at some point, doesn't that kind of become about you and not about every team you're playing?
That's the thing. I think it does. And being 361 on defense is not the greatest stat that we can pull out there prior to this game. So let's get predictions. I'm not necessarily telling you to pick a final score because basketball final scores are hard. I think the projected total was like 157 on KenPom for this game. It's a very high scoring basketball game.
It still seems low to me.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. Because I'm trying to think of how many points Mizzou's been scoring, and I'm like, I don't know.
I mean, 157 would be what, 80 to 77. So it's a high scoring game.
Yeah. I guess that's true.
It is. They're not gonna. I'll tell you this. This is my hot take. They're not gonna put up 100. Watch them put up 100 now. I don't think either team will put up 100 like the last time in this rivalry. I think this will be a lot closer of a game. I think it's probably, I could see it being a one possession game realistically, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? From where we were a year ago to where we are now, where you're getting blown out by 40. And now you're saying it could realistically be a one possession game. I don't know if that has anything to do with how this team is. I think it does have a thing to do how this team has changed from the year, but also, Kansas isn't the team they were from last year, right? That's also plays a big part into it.
Yeah, I don't know. I got to wait on this one, Maggie.
That's fine.
Maggie, go first.
Man. Okay. So I still think Missouri comes out on the bottom, but not by a lot. Like, it's not going to be a 40-point game. I was thinking somewhere around 77-83. 77-82, somewhere right around there, where it's still, like you said, a decent high scoring game, because we'll probably put a lot of points up. But with their defense, I don't know. I still don't think we're there. I don't think we're at the point that we are going to beat Kansas. I would love to say that we were in Dennis Gates' first year, but I just don't think we're there yet. So I still have to pick Kansas winning this game. Sorry, Mizzou fans.
Gabe, I want to ask you. I want to, before we get out of it, if I had $1 for every time I said last question, then ask another question, I wouldn't have to do this podcast anymore. I want to ask you about moral victories. Coaches aren't going to say anything about moral victories. Teams aren't going to say anything about moral victories, but we get to talk about those. Is it a moral victory if this game is within 10 points? Right? Do you think that
10?
That's
no,
5?
Not 10. If you take them to the last TV timeout, well, basketball is also weird when you're talking about final margin of victory, because what if you have 4 intentional fouls in the last minute, right?
Yep.
If you take this game to the last TV timeout and you've got a realistic shot to win, like, I think you can come out of that feeling good.
Yeah.
But like, I won't go moral victory. Look, I'm just gonna be honest. I'm not making a prediction on this game beforehand because I don't have a clue. Like, I can easily see a world where Missouri wins this game. I don't think that's being a homer. People I know that cover Kansas think Missouri's going to win this game. But I can also see a world where you just go, maybe we should have been a little more realistic of how they got to 9-0, and Kansas wins this game by 20. I can see that. And I don't know which one's more likely, which is why I'm not making a prediction, because I don't have a clue what we're going to see. I want to go in there on Saturday. I want to see 2 things. I want to walk in and feel like, okay, this program matters again. Like, I'm going to come to games here and it's not going to feel like a chore, which it has way too often in the last 10 years. Not every year. Like, that's discrediting Konzo. We went to the tournament twice. There have been some days. But what I want to see over the next, not just on Saturday, but the next couple months is, okay, this seems sustainable, right? Like, it's not going to be like this for every game because this is KU, but there might be some other games where you can see 13, 14, 15,000 people here for a game that matters. And then I just want to see a game that lives up to that. Whether Missouri wins it or not, like, I just want to see a game that truly feels like a big game, because it hadn't happened much. The only year that Missouri's provided us what could have been big games in the last 5 years, I mean, COVID was going on. Nobody was there. Right. So it's been, and even that, like, we talked the Iowa State game where Porter was making his debut. Like, that was a batshit atmosphere, but then like 5 minutes later, it wasn't. And really the rest of that year, we didn't get that. I mean, Jarrett talked about it a little bit. And every time I talk to anybody who played basketball here, 2012 or before, they just say, I just want to see it be what it was, man. Like, I talked to some of the 2002 guys at a game last year, and they said, I feel bad for these players that this is the atmosphere they're playing in. So they're going to get a taste of it on Saturday. And then Dennis Gates' job is to make that come back, right? Like the fans are going to show up because it's KU and because they want to make their Grady Dick sign and they want to boo Bill Self and they want to do whatever they're going to do on Saturday. But then it's up to the program to make that atmosphere come back for somebody that's wearing a different uniform. And, again, like I told you guys beforehand, this rivalry is one of the few things that this doesn't seem like work to me. This is going to be 4 hours of like, oh my God, I get paid to be here, on Saturday afternoon. And I'd love to see that come back. Like people get mad at me all the time. Why aren't you more of a fan? Well, look, this is my job, man. This is in every game kind of starts to feel the same, but I would love to have games where I'm like, I legitimately look forward to this. And Saturday is the first time I can say that in a long time with Missouri basketball. And I'd love to see it come back.
I went to that Mizzou or the Kentucky at Mizzou game in 2018, and that was pretty fun. But I mean, like you said, but it's wild because back when I was at college, because I was in college at Mizzou from 06 to 10, and then like grad school whenever the 2012 team was going on. But people didn't miss games back then.
Right. Like it used to be that way for Texas and for Iowa State and for Gonzaga. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think about it, or when Kansas State wasn't we hated Kansas State. I remember watching Blake Griffin play for Oklahoma. Yep. People didn't miss those games. And I look back on it now and I think about my college experience versus the college experience that people are having now. And it's wild to me because I'm Mizzou sports were massive whenever I was there. And it's just crazy to me that people willingly miss those games.
Yeah.
Well, big one coming up this weekend, obviously.
Different.
Very different product. Right. Yes. And I think that is going to be a big difference in how both of the teams, honestly, will do. This Mizzou basketball program seems like it's trending in the right direction. This game tips off Saturday is it 4:15? Is that what the time is? Weird time, by the way. 4:15, just go up to 4:30 or go down to 4. Either way.
Well, hopefully they've finally built in 15 extra minutes, so it's not a 2:00 game and a 4:00 game. And if you're watching on TV, there's 6 minutes gone when you turn it on.
Right. Hopefully so. So we'll be back on Monday to talk about that, and because there's no Mizzou football to talk about, so we'll be fully focused on Missouri basketball the next time that we talk to you guys. Super excited for this game. Make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Leave a 5-star rating and review if you feel so inclined. We really appreciate you taking some time and listening to us. And also, be a friend, tell a friend about the Mizzou That's Who podcast and the KCSM Mizzou channel, where you've got the Border War podcast as well going on. So appreciate you guys listening all the way to the end. We will talk to you guys on Monday.